Um, I'm I'm talking about something that's fairly complicated in its uh, in its way, but I've noticed here, and I've noticed in the past, like still reading through the journal, that um, the whole Gauquelin thing has melted down into one thing. You say Gauquelin to somebody, and say, "Oh, Mars," which has nothing to do with what I'm talking about today. This is the real thing here. The Mars effect business was a made-up business. So I'm keeping this simple, and I'm sticking to a few basic principles to try to get across something that's fairly complicated and even to me fairly weird. So I'll just begin here. From 1949 to 1970, French psychologist Michel Gauquelin carefully documented the fact that the Moon, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn can be found significantly at rise or upper culmination at the births of highly accomplished people in specific professions. The details of these discoveries challenged both science and astrology, yet the reaction of mainstream scientists ranged from unreceptive to completely hostile. But in 1986, an article written from a scientific point of view in a German journal began to change some minds. Authored by Sweetbert Ertel, a professor of psychology at the University of Göttingen, it was a fair, comprehensive review of Gauquelin's entire research program, which involved collection of birth data, sorting it into professions, and finding out whether these things that he discovered were hereditary or that whole thing. I'm not talking about all the funny stuff, just the basic thing, the birth data. This article included a direct test of Gauquelin's professional database that seemed to erase all doubts about his core findings. Yet 3 years later, Ertel said that his analysis made him question a key hypothesis of Gauquelin's, namely that each planet was associated with a specific set of character traits. Ertel then set out to prove this thesis, and the ensuing argument between the two, which I have to mention, I wasn't around then when they were arguing with each other, but when I read about it later, I thought something was being overlooked. They were so wasted on this one thing. And this talk is about what I have recently begun to think that something might be. But I want to start here with what I consider the two fundamentals of what Gauquelin did, the two things underlying that, because these are very important. These are spelled out on pages 67 to 71 in Gauquelin's first book, which was published in 1955 and is now out of print. It's called L'influence des astres, the influence of the stars. And you can hardly find it anymore. First fundamental is this, and it's based on the source of Gauquelin's professional data, biographical dictionaries listing people who had gained attention for their achievements in, quote, the most stable professions throughout the ages. Didn't deal with the little stuff. The second fundamental I consider even more important. It's what Gauquelin expected to learn from this data. Quoting again, whatever interpretation we try to give to the results obtained, the profession will only have been a pretext for us to reveal simple, stable factors inherent to men of all environments and all times. Now, close quote. That's, to me, is very important. He followed the first fundamental carefully because that was data collection and it was there and he just did it. But he made sure to keep together a spread of professions. That was important in the end. Well, let's see if my click works. No. Yeah, there we go. Hi there. Now this table here is a presentation of the basic results from the Gauquelin professional data collection. And it's very simple. Down the left, you see the professions. There were 11 of them, and you can see which they were on there. And then a plus simply means that, say, Mars here with doctors was found more often rising or culminating in a significant way. If there's a minus, that means it was less in a significant way. Now let me get back to Sweetbird for a minute. The results in that informal table seem clear enough, but Ertel's goal in his 1986 article, and this is the translated title, big one, Scientific Quality and Progressive Dynamics Within the Gauquelin Paradigm. His purpose there was supposed to explain and to test. Providing a detailed examination of Gauquelin's basic hypotheses would show how the initial success with planets and professions suggested areas of further exploration. Taken as a whole, the conclusions Ertel reached present a bright contrast to the dark dealings of Gauquelin's skeptic critics at the time. One sample, this is quoting Ertel, "The foundation of the Gauquelin hypotheses is a brilliant achievement of empirical science which is unparalleled in the history of the human and social sciences," unquote. So he kind of thought something was going on there. Now, within this article, he presented the results of a cluster analysis, hierarchical cluster analysis, big words, agglomerative method Ward's algorithm, for those who love hierarchical clusters. And he did this in order to check for problems, because he says, going into it, he says, well, you know, if he was faking it some way, or there were some things left out, or whatever, it would start to show in this kind of a cluster analysis. Tables like the basic results table that I showed previously can be useful for overall pictures, but proof requires a more careful and detailed look. And I should mention that Gauquelin had been working on all this since 1949, and now it was 1986. And this was the first time, and certainly the most comprehensive, the whole article, the most comprehensive multivariate treatment of Gauquelin's data. And though it answered many questions, as might expected, it actually did lead to other questions. And here it is. Ertel's tree, 6 clusters, 2 branches. This type of cluster analysis is built from the bottom up, so that at the bottom you'll have often pairs like you see here. Here we've got 5 pairs, and the lonely little writers there over on the right, there was no friend for him because there were only 11 professions. And for what this means, at the top where these 2 branches are highlighted, you'll see factual and fictional. And this is just something that the person doing the test runs as a way of trying to figure out what's going on here and what fits. So it's purely Ertel speaking. And factual versus fictional here could easily be factional versus abstractional, or data versus ideas. Now the next one is a little bit, this is fun. Students who had no knowledge of Gauquelin were tasked with a second cluster analysis using cards with only the names of Gauquelin's 11 professions on them. The students' subjective results on the left of this were, where was I? On the left, were almost the same as the data cluster, except for the fact that the, does this act like a pointer? I don't know. Anyway, the politicians on the left, P-O, there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's politicians, up from the bottom. P-O is politicians. And on the Ertel cluster, if you count up, you'll find that the P-O is not only two points above that, but it's also in the fictional category. So the students considered politicians as factual, and the data considered it fictional. So choose your politicians. All right, now here are again the basic results. And this time I've sorted them according to what was in Ertel's cluster. So that you see at the top, scientists and doctors together, and in the cluster, the scientists and doctors were one of those pairs. And when you look at under Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, across from scientists and doctors, they are the same. Mars and Saturn are plus, Jupiter is minus in both cases. And this continues, well, for the executives in the military pretty clearly, but down toward the bottom it begins to melt in, let's say the Mars melts away, there's not much Saturn, and you're now bringing the Moon, Venus, and Jupiter, which I hate to point out, and I don't do this lightly because I have a strange arrangement with astrology. That this is, in astrological terms, what you've got there is the malefics, Mars and Saturn, warring with the benefics, which Venus and Jupiter. That's kind of weird. But anyway, it seems to me that this is what we're seeing here is somewhat along the line of what I said were Gauquelin's simple, stable factors. I'm not sure quite why I say that, but there is something there that tells me that the likes of the differences that go on here are something that have to be paid attention to. Now here's an example. Now I'm going to get back to the trait thing again, the trait problem. This is just simply to show you how dug in Michel Gauquelin was on this trait business, because this is one of 5 large volumes. This one has 365 pages. And it's a big book. I've got it at home. It's like this. And what can I say? It took a lot of work, and reading these things, trying to read these things, it's beautiful work. It's beautiful the way it's presented, and it's believable that at least they were trying. Though I think it just came back. I never quite bought the character trait thing myself, not the way he did. And now, here's Ertel lecturing in 1989. This is 3 years after he wrote that article. Quote, "This tree is posing a disturbing question." Well, the full of it is this. Here's the full quote. "This tree may be enjoyable, but it is posing a disturbing Question: are its branches definable by Gauquelin's characterology, or by Eysenk's introversion or extroversion, or something similar? Applying temperamental variables does not make sense out of what you see here. This was one of the first reasons for me to doubt Gauquelin's character trait hypothesis and to do a series of studies aiming at testing it. The idea of such ambitious testing was, I think, an unfortunate divergence. And here is a key reason why I say that. In a 1990 lecture in Amsterdam, Ertel brought up his students' ability to match a planet-based analysis by using index cards with names on them, attributing their success to the order our minds tend to impose on the professions. That's what he said was going on with students. The thing is that that phrase is essentially a definition for the term occupational stereotypes. And this seems to indicate that trait words might have less to do with Ertel's disturbing question than he might have thought, my opinion. The term occupational stereotypes refers to the ability to distinguish in a useful way the differences and similarities among types of occupations. It has been studied, it's there, and documented extensively on people ranging from high school through middle age, and is the reason that Ertel's student volunteers could organize job names written on index cards in a meaningful way. As the late John L. Holland said in his third and final edition of his book, Making Vocational Choices, if perceptions of occupations had no validity, interest inventories would have no validity, and the average person would have great difficulty in selecting suitable jobs. Holland happens to be pertinent here due to two papers he wrote. The first, in 1959, described 6 occupational environments as a basis for integrating useful knowledge and stimulating new research. The 6 types eventually were designated realistic, investigative, artistic, social, enterprising, and conventional. I'm not going to go into what those mean. The second paper in 1969 introduced what is now known as the Holland hexagon. Let's catch up. Here is the Holland hexagon, an accidental discovery, accidental but meaningful, a discovery showing a circular relationship among the 6 types. The hexagon arrangement is based on data derived from vocational preference inventories and was jointly discovered, as I say, accidentally, in 1969 by Holland and by Douglas R. Whitney. It is not, in other words, a supposition. It's not something that someone made up and wrote on a napkin. And it is used widely in vocational guidance. Do I want this one yet? I don't know. I don't want to read that. Gauquelin's data, as it appears in Ertel's tree, certainly seems like a not-so-distant cousin to Holland's work. But proof is required, and, well, I'm going to stay there. Proof is required, and that's what I'm working on now. I'm not sitting there and doing a lot of heavy math to do it, but I'm trying to figure out whether or not there is actually a match between these two things. And if so, it would change a few people's minds in some way. Okay, what I've got here now at the end of the whole thing is a simple basic reading task. It's there's something about how to find Ertel's article, and good luck on that because it's not available really right now. I'm sure it will be at some point. But also Michel Gauquelin, who sort of disappeared even before he died, and people started beeping at him, was his second book, which is also very good, has been reprinted, or it's an Amazon book. And on Kindle, if you read it on a Kindle reader, you can actually translate parts of it. You could highlight things, so if you can't even read French, you might be able to get an idea out of it, which I think would be useful anyway. And then, of course, there's John L. Holland and Making Vocational Choices, but that's a big, heavy one. Recommended. So that's what I have to say. Thank you.